Happy Sunday. Hello, everybody. This is Pat Murray. I'm here with my guest. What we're going to do is, let me first tell you what you're watching. You are watching TV Skywriter. Skywriter, it's a funny name, but I just happened to publish a community newspaper called the Durham Skywriter here in Durham, North Carolina. I have a radio show called Radio Skywriter, which just ended on WNCU. It airs from 6:30 to 7. It's pre-recorded, obviously. And this is TV Skywriter. I talk to writers and musicians, artists, just creative people, entrepreneurs. And my friend Frank White told me about this gentleman, Chuck Dozier. He's here with us. He's at his home in Hillsborough, North Carolina. This is the book that he wrote. Actually, it's one of several upcoming, right?
That is correct.
And this one is called The Second Time Around. So I want to welcome you to the show, Chuck Dozier.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now I have two questions I want to start out with.
All right.
One, were you an avid reader as a kid? And then number two, did you know as a kid that you would end up writing books?
Oh, gosh. Actually, no, I was not an avid reader as a kid. In fact, I didn't even like reading, to be honest with you. I got into reading after college. I got into reading, and I began to develop a passion for it. And you know, just probably in the last 20 years, I've really gotten into reading, and I have a lot of authors that I follow, and then all of that kind of transformed into writing, which is what I have a passion for now.
Okay,
and you asked the second question.
When you started getting into reading after college, were fiction, mysteries, nonfiction, what?
Mostly fiction. I just enjoy reading, and a good story captures my attention. And it doesn't matter if it's fiction or a fact, but I just like a good story, and so most of what I do is fiction. You're talking about people like Terry McMillan, Jackie Collins, Nora Roberts, people of that nature. Those are some of the artists that I follow. Yeah.
Excellent. So I want to know how you got the idea for writing The Second Time Around.
Well, about 10 years ago or so, actually it started well before that. About maybe 20 years ago, I was asked by someone, I was prompted by someone to publish something that I had written, and I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind. And about 10 years ago, and I moved to North Carolina, I guess about 8 years ago, I had plenty of time on my hands, and I started reading through a lot of my old memoirs and looking at some of my old pictures, and I bumped into a friend of mine whom I had not talked to for years and years, probably 14 or 15 years. And she lives in West Virginia, and she was the inspiration for this novel. So we started talking on the phone and just kind of catching up on old times and all that good stuff. And the premise of this story is based on the results of that conversation, and we just kind of took off from there.
Interesting. Tell us what the book is about.
The book is about a couple that meets a young man that right out of college, he moves to a little southern town in Pennsylvania, and he meets an attractive middle-aged lady who's about 10 years his senior. And they had developed a relationship and are together for about 4 or 5 years. And then he has to move away. His company transfers him to another town, and the lady that he has a relationship with doesn't follow along with him because she fears that the age difference between them would allow their relationship to deteriorate over time. So she chose to stay in the little town in Pennsylvania, and they drifted apart. Well, years later, they reconnected after he was had gone on and had his own family and was living on the West Coast. And they reconnected, and then she realized that she still had strong feelings for him, and he was having problems in his marriage, and things kind of developed between them again, at this late date, and then he began to wonder if he had chosen the wrong woman for his life mate. So that's kind of how the story goes.
Interesting, because that's a story that we hear about every now and then.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how long did it take for you to write it? And I'm asking you some questions for beginning writers or for people who are considering writing fiction.
Sure.
Do you map out your story very carefully? I know some writers say that they develop their characters and just go where the characters want to take them. So how do you do it?
Well, I'm one of those. What I did, I'm kind of I call myself a what-if writer. I have a number of things that happen in my life, and I think about these things, and I start a process that starts the dialogue. And once I start writing the book, it just kind of develops on its own. The characters kind of take on a life of their own, and they just, whatever comes. Most times I don't know what's going to happen in the next paragraph. I write
primarily nonfiction, being a journalist, so
right.
That mystifies me, how you can write a story and not know where it's going.
I trust the story. I trust the characters. Once I develop the main characters and start the story, then I let the main characters determine what's going to happen in the story. And I know that sounds crazy, but it really does.
It works for you.
I'm one of those people. I let the story tell itself, and I just act as the narrator, if you will, or the scribe, and it goes from there.
Okay, and here's another question that some beginning writers might ask you. Once you finish the story, do you rewrite it or simply edit it?
I simply edit it. Because I allow the story to create its own flavor, I don't believe that I should involve myself in changing it all. I mean, to a degree, that's true. But if the story developed the way that I allow it to, or it does in my mind, then I let it go. I don't try to change it. I go back and edit it and tweak it, and I rethink some things and all of that. But I never change the overall story. It just, the life of the story is based on what it told me when I was writing it, and and I leave it that way.
Okay. So here's another question. How do you know how to start your story? Some writers really agonize over setting the stage and end up writing pages and pages of description. So how do you know how to start the story, whether you start right in the middle, and how do you know when the story is told? How do you know when to stop writing?
When I have the time to start writing, when I start a story, it's usually based on an idea that pops in my mind, or something that develops from a conversation I had with someone, or an incident that happened in my life or in someone else's life, or something of that nature. And I start recording it. If it's interesting enough to me, I start recording the incident, or whatever the case may be. And once
you talking to a tape recorder? Or?
No, my fingers do the writing. I never tape anything. I always sit down and I start typing, and when I start typing, the story just goes.
Wow. Okay, so how do you know when the story's over?
That's difficult, and many times you don't. In this particular case, in the second time around, that story came to a point where it just made sense that this is a time to end it, and the sequel will tell the outcome of what the original story was. But it just got to that point where it was obvious to me that this is the time to stop this story.
Right, because I guess they say very often when you write a story, you reach a high point,
right? Then
you resolve it, and then you hit another crisis, and then you continue. to
Right.
the end, so to speak.
A lot of that, you'll find a lot of that in this book, as a matter of fact. There are some highs and lows and ups and downs and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. But at some point, the main characters all coalesce, and it gets to a point where you think, okay, now this is a point where this has to come to a conclusion, or at least it has to take a break, whatever. In this particular case, it took a break,
Hmm.
and the sequel will continue the story to a
Okay.
conclusion.
Now, if I were like a critic, which I'm not,
Hmm.
one thing that I would say is that your writing is conversational, easy to read, and that doesn't mean simplistic,
Hmm.
but you have a nice flow, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not difficult to get into the story.
I
How did
think
you develop that, or did you have to actually work at it?
I didn't. I think that is as a result of the way that I allowed the story to tell itself. If I was conducting it or forcing it to go in one direction or another, it may not be that easy. It may not be that comfortable to read. But what I do is, as I'm writing, I allow the story to tell itself, so it becomes more conversational than a story that is obviously forced into a particular direction. I guess that's what you're sensing as you read the book.
Yeah. So does that mean that you actually wonder what's going to happen, like anyone else would?
I do. I do, and people laugh at me a lot about that. But as I said earlier, I don't know many times what's going to happen in the next paragraph. I know what's going on right now, and the character will tell me what's going to happen in the next paragraph. So I just keep writing, and then things come up because one thing may determine what happens the next time around, and I don't know what that is until I'm in it and writing it.
Hmm. Now here's another beginning question. Okay, there's an event in this book where the
Hmm.
dad falls out of the boat. He's taking the kids fishing.
Okay.
The way you describe how he falls in,
Hmm.
how the boat moves as he falls in, what
Hmm.
happens as he's rescuing his daughter,
Hmm.
it just seemed like that really happened to you. I mean, you have details in there that makes me wonder if that is from real life. Not that you ever, had to dive in the water to save someone, but it just
Hmm.
seems that you went through this because of the description of it.
Right. Um, I'm a country boy at heart. I grew up in the country, and a lot of the things you see described in here were things that I'm familiar with. Now, I've never had an incident exactly like what I describe in the book, but I know the sensations. I know the kind of the feelings of the characters as it's happening, and in order to describe it in a way that the reader can bring themselves into the story, you have to include those little details. And I try as best I can throughout the story to include those details that will make it clear to the reader exactly what's happening and have them sense it and feel it the same way that I do as I'm writing it. So
I think it's
that's
what makes it more engrossing too, because it seems like it's really happening.
right. Mhm. And
Now,
that's the intent.
here's something else I noticed in your book, and I mentioned this to you yesterday when we were doing our test run.
Hmm.
You have, okay, naturally your chapters start out, chapter 6, chapter 7, whatever,
Right.
but you have these little, every, I would say every other page or every few pages, you have these little guides, like subtitles. And it reminds me kind of like Charles Dickens or something. Like you'll have Gail after the phone call with Norman, and then Norman gets home after talking to Gail. You actually have subtitles like that. And I think I'm going to say the same thing I said yesterday. It's really helpful to people who, you know how it is, you're reading and someone's saying, hurry up, let's go, we got to go somewhere. And you're like, well, let me finish this chapter real quick.
Hmm.
But by your thoughtfully putting in these subtitles, I think it enables someone to put the book down for a second and to be able to more easily get back into the book when they come back.
Well, I
Was
appreciate
that on
that.
purpose? Was that an accident that you, are you a big Charles Dickens fan or what?
No, I'm not a big Charles Dickens fan. The way that all developed is when I'm writing, and right now I am in the process of writing probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 different manuscripts that I'm working on, all different stories
Great.
not related to each other.
Whoa.
Um, when I'm writing, um, I write what's in my head and what happens in the story until I run out. And when I've exhausted that, then I drop the story. And I may drop it for a week, a month, or a year, and come back to it. When I come back to it, by having those little subtitles, it allowed me to go back, and I knew what was happening in the story, so I could go back a few pages and read it and catch up, and then take off from there with
Mhm.
new ideas, new thoughts that I've developed over that period of time, the absence, and all of that, and bring it in. But after I finish a manuscript and I look back at it, and I'm able to go back through that, and it's easy to follow the story for me, I got the idea that it might be easy for a reader to follow the story as well, and you're just validating that now.
Mhm.
So I left it in, and so that when you're going through the book, I may make a comment as a subtitle, and you kind of get a feeling that you know what's going to happen in this part. So it gives you the impetus to go ahead and read that part to see if, in fact, what the subtitle says is, in fact,
Mhm.
what you're thinking.
Very clever and very thoughtful. Now, how in the world do you work on more than one manuscript at the same time? How is that even possible? I can't get my mind around that.
Uh, the short answer is I don't know. I, I just I just can. I have a lot of um, experiences in life. I've traveled a lot. I've met a lot of people over time. A lot of my stories are surrounding places that I've been, people that I've met, relationships that I've had, different things that have happened throughout my life and places that I've gone. So when I start writing, it's because of I develop an interest in one of those things, a place, a time, or person, or an incident. And when I start the story and get it started, then when I run out of ideas for that part of it or whatever is in my head at that point, I may be ready now to go back to a story that I started 6 months ago because I had some ideas over that time, over the absence for that story. So I go back and I'll start writing that and bringing those ideas
Mhm.
to the pages
Okay.
that I've been thinking about.
So this book, the second time around, which is your first published book, it just
Correct.
happened to reach the finish line first then.
Yes, that particular book, I finished it several years ago. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. I finished the manuscript, and I had let a number of friends read excerpts from it as I was writing it, and everyone was giving me feedback that was just totally positive. And these are people that would not tell me something and not mean it. So I began to feel strongly about it, but I could not find a publisher that I felt comfortable with. There was a publishing company in Los Angeles, Rosie Milligan Publishing in Los Angeles. Uh, it was suggested to me by a friend that I allow her to see this manuscript. So I sent it to her and I paid her to evaluate the manuscript. She
Okay.
did that, and she came back with an excellent evaluation. And I went through it. I spent an hour and a half or 2 hours on the phone with her, going through details in the manuscript, and she outlined everything that she saw that could be tweaked to make it more interesting, or things that need to come out of it that would kill the story and that kind of thing. But the overall evaluation for the manuscript was excellent. And so, because I couldn't find a publisher that I felt comfortable with, that I could get everything I wanted for the story, most people wanted my rights for 7 or 8 or 10 years of that kind of thing, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I just held on to it, and in the last year or so, I ran into the publisher that actually did publish it, and we were able to get together a deal that I'm comfortable with,
Hmm.
and so I went forward.
Wonderful. I mean, it's a good-looking book too, and by training, I'm a proofreader and editor, so I have to say I haven't found any typos yet. So that makes me feel really good because it kills me. It
Yeah.
can really kill the mood when you're reading a good book. You're really engrossed, and then giant typos just smack you upside the head. I really hate that. So
Well, I'm kind of a
I
stickler
appreciate
for
a good job. I appreciate a good job.
I'm
Really.
kind of a stickler for detail when it comes to that, and so I had this book proofread 3 times, and then I read it myself, parts of it, to find mistakes and that sort of thing. So it's been thoroughly researched, and there'll be a few errors here and there in it, but all in all, it's not going to be something that is glaring and glowing. Um,
So what would you say to young people? Well, maybe I shouldn't say young people. I should say people who. Well, some people say that everyone has a story inside of them. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say.
right.
So, how would you give advice to people who they might want to write a book, but they just don't know how to get started?
Right. Um, I'm going to say something that probably every writer has said, and that is just start writing. Um, I can't say that any plainer. If you have a story inside of you that you feel needs to come out, just start writing. And it doesn't matter if your writing is professional or not. You're getting it out of you and onto paper, onto a medium that you can someone else can see it. Once you start that, which is how my career developed actually, once you start writing and start putting the story in a format that others can see it and evaluate it, things will start to happen. You will get instruction, you will get clarity. In my case, I had people that read my stuff and they would give me critique, critical feedback, and I paid attention, and so it just developed like that. But I started writing, gosh, probably 20 years ago, uh,
Wow.
and
Okay.
it wasn't really that good at that time. I was just putting notes down
Sure.
and that kind of thing. But now I've gotten to a point where I feel comfortable writing anything.
That's great. Well, another thing that I want to just point out, if you don't mind,
Sure.
sometimes I like to frequent the writers' forums online every now and then, and sometimes writers who are, relative beginners, they'll say something like, I'm agonizing over the beginning. I just can't seem to get it right, and I'm stuck.
Hmm.
And my thing is, just like what you said, just so jump over that.
Right.
Start where you're comfortable. Like, even when I'm writing articles,
Hmm.
sometimes I can't think of how to enter the story,
Hmm.
but I know how I want it to end because I've already interviewed the person, I already know what I'm writing about, and I know
Right.
how I want it to end. So I'll jump to the ending. I'll do that first. Or I'll jump to the middle.
Hmm.
And by the time you're continuing on with the story, typing it out, thinking about it,
Right.
eventually the beginning will occur to you. Eventually. It might take a while. And it might take a couple of rewrites. Like in my case, sometimes I'll write a story all the way through and I'm
Hmm.
done. Sometimes I start at the end and work backwards. Sometimes I
Hmm.
start in the middle and jump back and forth. And sometimes I have to rewrite it a couple of times.
Hmm.
Whatever it takes to get it down, just get it down. You know,
Right.
um,
Right.
start wherever you're comfortable, and they say stop when you're done.
Well, in my case, all of the above. I do some of that too. In fact, in this particular story, in the second time around, there's probably I don't know, a half a dozen or so main characters that come in and out of the story along the way. I may be writing about Gail um, this week, and I'm writing everything that I can think of about Gail. But Gail depends on what Gail does depends on what Norman does in the next part of the story. So I'll write about Gail and Norman, and then maybe Janice comes back into the story, and But anyway, I'll get to a point where I've said all that Gail can say, and I've said all that Norman can say. I will go away from that. If I get to a point where I don't know what they want to say next, I'll just stop the story, and I'll make a note to myself at that point, continue this, and then I move on to another character, and I'll take that character and I will say whatever they have to say, and I'll come back at some point, maybe a week, maybe a month, whatever. I'll come back, but I'll have that note there that says there was an idea. This story is not complete. This part of the story is not complete, so I need to go back and complete this. And that's what where I'll start with that note and go back and complete that thought. And it usually at that point it's clear and it coalesces and moves forward.
Interesting. Now, again, this is your first published book, so which book is making its way toward the finish line next, or do you want to tell us about that yet?
This book has a sequel. This book is the second time around. The sequel will be called Bouncing Back. And Bouncing Back is almost finished. I have a deadline for myself of July, mid-July, to finish it. So I'm about 2/3 of the way finished with it now. And the reason it hasn't finished is because I wanted to get a reaction from the readers of the second time around before Bouncing Back could be complete.
In order to guide the storyline, or what?
Well, I wanted to understand how interesting the story was from a reader's perspective, not just people that are close to me and around me. I want people that have never heard of me, people that never read my stuff, that didn't even know who I am. I wanted to find out what they thought. And the feedback that I've gotten from people like that tells me what needs to go into the next story and kind of what happens with the sequel. So the story has a basic premise, and it's going on on its way, but the feedback that I've gotten determines whether this story is interesting enough to be a 2-book series or maybe even a trilogy. I don't know at this point, but the sequel will definitely be as good, if not better, than the original book.
Awesome. Do you foresee this being a movie? I don't know how books become movies. Do you think this would make a good movie?
I think it would. I think it would be a very good movie, actually. I've thought about that, and I've had discussion with some people about it. Nothing serious, of course, but I would love to have someone that is in that business pick up the story and look it over and see if, in fact, they think it would make a good enough story for a movie.
Well, one thing that sets it apart is something that I'm going to read from the back cover here. And it says, this book depicts marriage, disappointments, and disillusions from a male perspective. That alone makes it unique, because I never really thought about it. But most books dealing with relationships and family, to tell you the truth, as far as my reading, has always been from the female perspective. So that alone makes this, to me, more unique than what I'm used to coming across.
You know, I was asked that question by another friend, someone that I knew, and I have never, in all of the books that I've read, and God, I've read, hundreds, I've never read a book about the kind of story that is in the second time around that was written by a male and actually, if you will, from a male perspective. I had never, so that does make my book unique, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So how are you marketing this book? What goes into marketing and sales?
Well, at this point, I have a goal of the number of copies I need to sell in order to make me feel like that it's a serious book. I've been contacting people through my extended network, Facebook, LinkedIn. The publisher has a campaign going on where they have they've sent out press release in about 7 or 8 different major markets across the country, We've gotten some good feedback from that. So there are a number of different avenues that I'm following, but it's going pretty well. I'm satisfied with the results thus far.
Excellent. Have you been inspired to run any workshops? I know some writers like to give back, so to speak, and run workshops for young people. Have
I
you
would
considered
love
doing
to.
that?
Yes, I would. I would love to do that. I have not found a forum at this point, but I would love to wherever. I have a
One suggestion I have is to try the Hillsborough Library. That would be the best place to start. I've
okay.
actually held workshops in all of the Durham County libraries. I think all
Mhm.
of them except Parkwood, which is now closed. It's been replaced by
Right,
a new library. But I think I've run my writing workshop at just about all the libraries in Durham.
right.
And I suggest you do the same in Hillsborough.
Not a bad idea. That's a great suggestion.
Hmm. So you said you didn't want to really tell us what's coming up to the finish line next. You did tell us that the sequel is going to be just as intriguing and engrossing as your first book. But are you able to tell us? You said you're working on several books at one time. Are you able to tell us just a couple of little storylines? Can you give us little hints of some stories you're working on?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I have one. What I've set out a plan for myself that I have. I think it's 6 or 8 manuscripts that are pretty well complete. My plan once I started publishing was to, first of all, if I got good feedback from the first book, then I'm going to start publishing one each 6 months until I've published all of those that I have that are relatively complete. So the
That sounds
sequel will be
ambitious. That sounds really ambitious. Wow.
the sequel will be the next one, and I'm targeting the September-October time frame to have it in print. Then next spring, I have another novel that is completed already. It's set in West Virginia, and it's a really good story. I think that, in my opinion, that story is actually better than the second time around. I'm targeting next spring to publish that one.
What's it
Um,
about? If you don't mind telling us, what's it about?
it's about a couple who the the lady and it's a love story, and it's all fiction. The lady in the story was married, and she meets the guy in the story, and it's called Reese's Rock is the name of the story, and they didn't know each other's favorite place in the woods was this particular rock, and it was a large rock that was deep in the woods, and the guy in the story would go there and with on a hunting trip, but he would never kill anything. He just sat there with his gun and watched the animals, and he enjoyed the nature of it and all of that good stuff. The lady in the story was an avid hunter and very good marksman, and she would go there and use the rock to actually kill animals. And
Wow.
they met at the rock one day and had a rendezvous liaison, and then left without any contact from each other and or any contact information.
Sure.
And so they kept going back to the rock to see if they could catch up with the other person, and that goes on for years. Um, so that's kind of how that
Interesting.
works out. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, some writers can't think of a name until they're done. So, are you one of those writers who thinks of a title first and then writes to the title, or you just happen to be able to come up with the title just for these three particular books?
I am one of those writers that the title is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Hmm.
Um,
Really?
and I write the story around the title.
Hmm.
And in the case of the story that I just outlined, Reese's Rock, um, that that story is all about the rock, and everything has to come back to the rock. So once I found out what the title was going to be, I knew what the story was how it was going to develop. I have another one. It's a Caribbean story that is surrounding travel through the Caribbean, and most of the stuff that I write is romance kind of thing. So that was a romantic story with travels throughout the Caribbean, and I just named that the Caribbean story. But you know, everything around that surrounds that.
How about the love stories from a man? I love it. So we'll be looking for those books. Tell us how to find this book the second time around.
The second time around is available in a number of different outlets, including Amazon. You can go to Amazon and download it, the electronic version, or you can order both the paperback and the hardback. Barnes & Noble, the same thing. You can go to the publisher's website and order the book. The best way to find out all of the information about the book and about myself and things that are happening is to go to my website, which is chuckdozier.com.
chuckdozier.com. Okay.
Correct. If you go to chuckdozier.com, I have on there posted information about pricing and different outlets that you can acquire the book, and things about myself, and some excerpts from this book that you can read. Information about what's coming next and all of that stuff.
Now, in the second time around, you have a lot of dialogue. You have a good ear for dialogue. You have some introspection, and you have some action. So that sort of makes me think this would have made a good book on CD. Have you considered making this, making a recording of this book? Where people listen to it while they're driving?
It's interesting that you would mention that, because yes, I have. In fact, I'm in the process of researching that right now to find a recording company that would actually do that. And I have a voice. I have a person whose voice that I see telling this story, and I have not worked out.
You have a voice too, though.
Well, I'm not so sure that my voice is the voice that would bring this story to life.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to be honest about it. I could probably do it, but I just don't see my voice being the voice that would bring the story to life. I have a lady that I know that I feel that her voice is the voice that would bring this story to life to CD, and I haven't worked it out yet.
From a male perspective, you think a woman reader would do better justice to the story?
I do. I do in this case. I do in this case. I do.
Oh, okay. So tell us again. It's obvious by looking at the screen that you just go to chuckdozier.com to learn everything about what's happening with you, your books. Do you give, I don't even know if writers do this, but do you give like hints or progress report on future works?
I haven't yet, but that's one of the things that I intend to do. This website is
anticipation, you know.
Right. This website is a few months old, and I'm still working my way through the second time around and the marketing effort of that and on all of that. But once I'm comfortable with that part of it, I intend to start moving forward with helping my audience to understand what's going on next. Other projects that I'm working on, workshops that I might be involved in, speaking engagements, book signings, all of that stuff. Those are all things that I would like to start working with. But right now I'm trying to make sure that this book finds its own feet, if you will.
Speaking of which, did you have have you had any big book signings in Hillsborough, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill?
Not yet. I've had a couple of book signings, but they were very small. It was kind of a wet your feet kind of thing for me. I have a larger book signing that's set up for July 6th in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Myrtle Beach? Sounds like a vacation to me. Wait a minute.
A little bit of that too. And I'm working on another one, actually two more, one in West Virginia in late July, and another one in oh gosh, where is it? In Portsmouth, Virginia, later in July sometime. And those promise to be pretty good size. And I'm willing to go wherever if someone out there knows of an organization or an event that they feel they would be interested in my work, and it makes sense, then I'm willing to go.
Okay. Another thing that authors are doing now that the internet, I mean, I'm hoping that this interview helps as well, but another thing that authors do nowadays, they take, they call them blog tours.
Mm-hmm.
That might be fun for you to get yourself on other shows like this one.
Right.
They talk to writers, and it might be fun.
Well, I'm looking. I would be interested in that. I do have contact with a couple of other people. One of a radio show that is interested in an interview with me. We haven't worked out anything yet, and I'm hoping some other things like that will come along, like what you've done here. And I want you to know I really do appreciate this, this
Sure.
audience, but. I do have some things in mind, and I'm open to any suggestions that yourself or anyone else out there that may know of something that would be of interest to this particular cause.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Chuck Dozier, for being on TV Skywriter. This is the book, The Second Time Around.
Thank you.
I know. How did it feel to hold the book? You know, was it like holding a new baby?
Yes, it was. It was great when they sent me my initial author's copy to go through it and be sure that I was comfortable with everything. I carried it with me for a couple of days, feeling it, just you know, funneling it like it was my baby, you know. And yeah, it's a great feeling. Very good.
That's cool. So I guess you'll be feeling that in the next few months. And then every 6 months after that, or so, 6 or 7 months?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thanks very much for being on TV Skywriter. Now, if you'd like to be a guest on TV Skywriter, if you're a writer, musician, visual artist, entrepreneur, if you're just really interesting and creative, get in contact. You see here, DurhamSkywriter.com. You can write to me at DurhamSkywriter@gmail.com. Be sure to read the Durham Skywriter community paper, which is at DurhamSkywriter.com if you live in the area, or even if you don't. If you've never seen an all-positive community paper, which sounds kind of crazy, but it works for me, so check that out if you want to see something like that. Okay, my phone number is 919-809-9682. Don't mind giving that out. So get in contact with me any way you can if you want to be on the show, and I'll see you next Sunday. Ciao.